Welcome to CoCo Conversations, in-depth discussions with color computer luminaries, past and present. In this episode, I interview Kath Paur, who worked for A&A Electronics, a subsidiary of Tandy Corporation, instrumental in procuring parts for various computers and Tandy products. I wanted to get started and talk about the history of A&A as it relates to Tandy. Now, that was covered to some degree in the presentation, I think, that you were involved in. And I know that A&A was started by some people was it in the Northeast, or was it in Japan?
In New York.
In New York, right. It was a Japanese family, right?
Yes.
In fact, was it the Yamagata family?
It is, in fact, the Yamagata family.
And there was a gentleman by the name of Mark Yamagata who worked for Tandy.
That's true. He's their eldest son.
I talked to him during the writing of the interview process for writing the book. So A&A supplied parts. Now, was A&A a subsidiary of Tandy Corporation, or was it a totally independent?
Well, at different times, A&A International was a subsidiary and then a division of Tandy Corporation. So during my time there, Arlo, both of those entities existed from a legal perspective.
Tell me the history of when you came to work for Tandy Corporation. That'll help set the stage.
Well, when I first started working at, we always said A&A. We didn't say we were working for Radio Shack. Sometimes we said Tandy Corporation, but basically we were quite separate and quite close to Radio Shack in a number of different ways. But when I first came to A&A International, the big thrust at that time was CB radios. And so everyone was trying to buy as many as they could from whatever sources they could get reliable product from. And of course, in the case of Radio Shack, I think you've heard from probably Paul and also Jerry that the approval process was, sometimes a bit lengthy, and it was always fairly rigorous. So anyway, that's what was happening when I first came to A&A, but I had not been there very long until the TRS Model 1 Project 80 was in its infancy. And so, we started our relationship in the computer aspects of what Tandy Radio Shack was doing with the TRS-80 Model 1. Now, we had been, I guess you might say, well entrenched with the manufacturing facilities, especially the board stuffing facility, which was known as Tandy Instruments, because we supplied, I would say, the lion's share plus a little of their passive components, and then, some connectors and other specialized board level type components that they needed. And then we worked with wire and cable and did a number of plugs and connectors and things like that with them. So definitely we had a large footprint in the manufacturing facility. And at the same time, we were also doing some telephones at one of the factories known at Tandy Apparatus. So again, the types of components that were appropriate for A&A to supply, we were supplying. So those categories of components, as you might call them, pretty much remained through the life of every computer product that was manufactured in the Fort Worth area. And even as after the acquisition of AST Research, and there was a transition of the board stuffing activity, first of all, to one of their facilities in, I believe it was in Hong Kong, we continue to supply and work through that transition.
Did you?
But
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
Did you at A&A? Did you? This is how I see an A. This is how I see A&A. Maybe I can explain this if my understanding is correct. So A&A would procure parts, and when I say parts, I'm talking probably what capacitors, resistors, all of the multiple electronic
Things on the
parts,
board, crystals,
crystals, right?
oscillators, connectors, switches, all
Source
of
these
those types
from
of things.
manufacturers that would and get these in large volumes at a good price, and then resell them to Radio Shack.
Well, actually, the process was like this. In the case of a new, let's just say a new board, let's just, say
For an
anything
answering
like
machine
a,
or whatever, right?
yeah. So we would work with the engineering group and understand their requirements, their shopping list, so to speak. And, if it was an item that we were already supplying, they could do a part number research and just plug that Tandy or part number into their BOM, Tandy manufacturing part number into their bills of material. And then if it was something altogether new or a variant of one of the things that we were supplying, then we would work with a group of manufacturers, maybe get quotes from two or three, if it were such that two or three, or if it were so that two or three suppliers could do it. And also check and make sure we knew the availability, capacity issues, and things like that, which didn't happen often with the most common of the board level materials. But anyway, we would sample it. It would get approved. It get approved by the engineering group first, and then built into the pre-pro and production samples that were provided to the Radio Shack approval group. And so then we would get, the official BOM placement. And so that's pretty much how it happened. And that wheel just kept turning and turning and turning and happening as, different values changed on capacitors or
Sure.
resistors or whatever. And also as we went from the age of, through hole components to surface mount components.
Right.
And so that was a large part of what we did. Now, for instance, you've written your book about the CoCo computer. I think one of the things that we added there was a modulator, RF modulator, which had not been something that we had previously supplied board level component. And then we had a challenge with the keyboard in that AMP introduced the chiclet style keyboard. And I keep looking at the CoCo that you have there on your desk, and I can't tell if it's a first or later generation of the keyboard, but initially that keyboard was supplied by AMP, and that was their sort of foray into keyboard manufacturing. And I'm not quite sure how long that lasted for AMP, but the next time we revved the CoCo computer, we had sourced a new, we always lovingly called it the chiclet computer, our keyboard. We sourced that from one of the suppliers that we knew quite well in Asia. And so we replaced AMP with that keyboard. And that was what it was all about. It was to leverage as many of the assets that Tandy Corporation had to have the most, positive impact on the bottom dollar. So obviously, if A&A is involved in the procurement and delivery of a component, and we're also offering a cost savings, then it's really the icing on the cake, so to speak, because where we are making money in the A&A related transactions, as well as reducing the total cost of the bill of materials. And so those were a lot of our guiding principles. It's the bottom line. What can we bring?
Sure.
And can we bring it with value? And also, is it a solution versus a problem?
So if I can kind of analogize this, A&A was like going today to shopping on Amazon versus Walmart, finding the best price for some product, right? And then making sure that that product was available in volume, making sure that it met the specifications, but finding the best combination of price and value and quality for the
Right.
products.
And delivery was always critical,
and delivery, yeah,
especially
and
first
timing and
volume
so forth.
shipments.
Sure. So let's talk about the color computer, since you mentioned the keyboard. The CoCo 1, which was the gray initial color computer that was released in 1980, was also a cousin to the Videotex that used what was called the chiclet keyboard. Literally, it looked like the keys had very much of a gap between them. So that was the CoCo 1 keyboard. Then the CoCo 2 keyboard came out. It was what we call the melted keys. The keys were very low profile. They weren't as chiclet as they didn't have the gaps between the keys that the CoCo 1 had, but they were very, very low profile depressed keys. This particular keyboard that you're pointing out to here is the raised later CoCo keyboard that also has the same type of key profile that the CoCo 3 had. So was AMP the original chiclet CoCo 1 keyboard and the melted
was the
keyboard?
original chiclet keyboard. And then, as you mentioned, the difference in those two chiclet type keyboards. And, I'm having to rely on memory here.
Memory, sure.
If memory serves me correctly, the keyboard, which we sourced out of Japan from a company by the name of CoCo, was the second. And if I also remember correctly, when we got to the CoCo 3, we needed, our merchandising marketing was requiring a keyboard that had more travel. And I think that's what I'm seeing on your desk is the keyboard that had a little bit more travel and more of a desktop type feel.
Yes, the later CoCo 2s had that same high travel, long travel that the melted keyboards didn't, and the CoCo 3 inherited that. So the keyboards that you got from CoCo and from AMP, but mostly from CoCo, because that's where the CoCo 2 and CoCo 3 keyboards came in. Did you buy those keyboards fully assembled, or did you get them separately? Did you get different pieces? How was the bill of materials looking like for that?
Okay, so the keyboard came in as a single SKU, and it had, I think, a ribbon connector.
Yes, that's right.
That was connected during the assembly process. I think it was a single insertion ribbon connector.
So here's a CoCo 3 keyboard.
Okay. So yeah, there's the ribbon connector.
Right.
And
there's a Mylar sheet that when you take the back off.
Right.
So when you source this from CoCo, they gave you here's a keyboard, everything
this is it.
To plug in.
It was a single SKU, and that took care of the keyboard.
And do you know, so you got that as a single SKU, and then they put it together essentially.
Right. Just as they did, the case and the PC board and all of the things that the assembly factory took care of.
Did they do the case as well for the color computer?
The case?
Yes.
The case was, I'm not sure who did the case at that particular time, but we did have an entity known as Tandy Molded Products. And they did some case parts. I just, because I was not involved in the external housing the case, I don't,
Sure.
have much of a memory about who did those, but for quite a number of years, it was Tandy molded products.
Reason I ask is the color computer is still used by aficionados and cultists, you could say, people like me that
Mm-hmm.
used it as a kid. And one of the things that we wish we had were the plastic injection molds for things like the case. Those are probably long gone, I'm sure. But
I'm sure they are.
very complex parts, right? Because the case itself was a complex piece. But yeah, A&A, as you said, dealt with more of the electronics parts. So the keyboard was sourced from AMP and
Was
MG.
purchased like that, packaged vertically in a box and pulled out at the assembly line and
Then started and tested,
connected.
right? Do you remember? So going back to the color computer product line, there was the color computer 1, the CoCo 2, and then the CoCo 3. Do you remember anything called the deluxe color computer?
I remember the name. I don't necessarily remember a project number associated with it. And I think it was rather short-lived, if I
It
remember
never
correctly.
made it to market. It was manufactured, and I have a couple, and there are a few in existence, but my understanding is that they were manufactured, but for certain reasons they were pulled at the last minute, and whatever was made was destroyed. But we think that the keyboard design for the deluxe color computer, which if you look at this keyboard here, this CoCo 2 keyboard,
Mm-hmm,
or CoCo 3 keyboard, excuse me, it has F1 and F2 keys that weren't
mm-hmm.
on the CoCo 2 keyboard.
And that, okay, so that keyboard, um, because we were concerned about the travel and the customer experience in using the keyboard. So we went to a keyboard from Fujitsu at that point.
For the
So
CoCo 3?
that is not a Gelco keyboard. The
Ah,
flatter one is the Gelco keyboard, which replaced the AMP keyboard.
got it. So the AMP keyboard was the CoCo 1 chiclet. It sounds like the Gelco was the CoCo 2 melted keyboard, which was the less travel. And then
Right.
the later
CoCo 3 would
one,
have used a keyboard similar to 557, which was a little bit further down the line.
you talked about the video modulator. That box, that little rectangular,
Little silver box with lots of pins.
that's right, has a lot of parts in it. Did y'all source that as a complete put together
It
item?
was sourced as a complete unit.
Got it. Now, as far as the chips themselves on the CoCo or the CoCo 1, 2, or 3, the Motorola chips, were you involved in any of that, or was that a separate process
No,
done by
because they're a
someone else?
U.S. manufacturer.
Ah,
So A&A International sourced products from Japan, Taiwan, Korea, Hong Kong. That's where we had offices. And then later we had offices in Singapore. But we sourced, hang on, I'm not on my computer and it's getting very dark. I'm not quite sure we're plugged in. Yeah, we are.
okay.
Okay, there we go. This is my son's computer. I'm visiting him this week.
Okay.
So anyway, we sourced from those countries, and most of the semiconductor. Well, there were. Let's just speak in generalities here. Most of the semiconductor products, the key architecting piece of it, was done by U.S. manufacturers, and so we didn't ever try to gain control of that building, of those products now, and also memory. And if I'm trying to remember, I think there may have been some tariff concerns as to why we didn't get too involved in those types of products and our components. And then also, let me see. I'll pull my thoughts together in just a second. Those types of products were some of the gating lead time items. And so our first volume shipments, considering that most of the products that we brought in, a few were air freighted, and even some very heavy products were air freighted. But for the most part, we were doing, full containerized vessels of products coming out of the various ports in the Orient. And so there was a significant travel time, typically 30 days from port to receipt at the factory in Fort Worth if it came out of Japan, and 45 days on the other types of things. And so if you think about the semiconductor content and the process through the fab, it was always good that those things were produced
in the
on
United
shore.
States. Sure.
So
let's talk about. Oh, I'm sorry.
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, well, you bring up something that I wanted to touch on. The CoCo 1 and the CoCo 2 were made in the USA at a Tandy factory in Fort Worth.
Yes.
At some point, and I think based on the data I have, it was around 1984, the CoCo 2 manufacturing moved to the Republic of Korea.
That's correct. It was a Tandy-owned factory in Korea.
I presume that move was for economic reasons.
Yes.
Did your work with the CoCo parts procurement change in any way because of that move?
Well, actually, what the change was is that the CoCo 3 came in as a complete finished good items. So, complete finished good items in the computer category in general, the large umbrella computer products came in under a 26 number, 26 dash da 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 da. And so another group within A&A Fort Worth was responsible for the finished goods, the 26 series items. So other than just cooperation with the sister company in Korea regarding, our supply-based bills of materials and things like that, that was pretty much the extent of it. The manufacturing facility in Korea was Tandy Electronics Korea. We also had a Tandy Electronics Japan group.
But the CoCo was, the CoCo 2 moved to Korea because you can find, and of course back then, even now on eBay, you can find CoCo 2s that have at the bottom label made in the USA and made in Korea. Now the CoCo 3 was made in Korea at its beginning because the CoCo 2 was end of life, I presume, somewhere in 1985, right. And the CoCo 3 was taken over. And then the CoCo 3 came back to the United States in 1988, and there was a Tandy factory built specifically to build color computers in Fort Worth. I think it was Kinji Nishikawa.
It was Tandy Home Computers.
Yes.
So we were differentiating at that point between our home computers, hobbyist game, sure. And we were and then the business computers.
The business computer, right? Tandy 1000, 2000, and so forth. So the CoCo 3 comes back to America in 1988 and finishes off its life. I think it was in 1990 that Ed Juge announced that it was going to no longer be manufactured. So that period, the CoCo started in 1980, ended around 1990, was a 10-year period. Had 3 iterations that were sold, plus the one that we talked about, the deluxe color computer that never made it. Were you interfacing into Radio Shack or Tandy the people who were involved in the color computer, like Barry Thompson, for instance?
Sure.
And Mark Siegel, does those names ring a bell?
Yes. And the people who wrote the manuals, and so the Tech Pubs group, all of that.
So yeah, that Donna Smith was, I think, the author of the Color Computer Basic Manual. Does that ring a bell? Is that right?
Rings a bell.
Yeah. So the the people that you interface with the color computer, what were those interactions like? Was it more like was there a QA aspect to it since you were supplying the parts? Were you getting feedback for how the parts were working or how the product was going in the field, or what was it like? I'm just curious what the feedback loop was.
So, I mean, in general, the dialogue was, especially if it happened to be an item that was underdeveloped, like let's say a power supply for one of the computers, then there was always the uh, question about delivery and the progress of the development by the manufacturer. So a lot of the meetings were around readiness, risk assessment, those types of things. Sometimes, for a number of reasons. There was a delay in their development process. So, what's the recovery plan?
Mm-hmm.
And we got very good at sort of interlacing air and sea shipments at that point, so that we would start with an air shipment and that would do about a month's worth of production, and then we would move on to the air shipments. So a lot of it was really just the availability of all of the components for first volume shipment, and did we have any issues that needed special attention. And then sometimes there would be discussions about raw customer feedback on one of the computers, and that would come to us from merchandising. And then did we have action items with the suppliers to remedy that, or is it something that's already sort of in the works to be fixed with the next iteration of
Right.
that particular
Right.
product? So we had those types of discussions, and also cost.
Oh yeah, yeah. Tandy was big on that, right? Let's get the profit margins up and get parts in as cheap as possible. Sure. So we have about I'm gonna be running out of time here on this meeting in about 9 minutes. So I'll ask you, is there any story, color computers related story that you think would be interesting for the podcast or for people to know?
Well, it might be, and it goes back to the Gelco keyboard. And because they were coming off of very new tooling, we had an issue in that when they passed outgoing inspection in Japan and were, packaged for shipment, they were very, very clean. When we received them at the factory, not all, but some had residual oil from the tooling machine around the keycaps. So obviously that was an issue of primary concern, because the keyboard is, the monitor, the keyboard, those are the two most important human-centric components. And it had to be stellar. It had to look great. So we worked with the manufacturer to first make sure that we were really understanding what the issue was. That was the supposition that it's something residual from the tool. Is that fixed on that side? And are we sure that nothing else is going to come here that has this problem? Are there some lots in shipment that might exhibit the same problem? Because we had to add a step into the process to clean them up. So that's just kind of a sidebar. Like, oh my gosh, they are
Well,
glistening with oil around the keycaps.
so that got resolved. Do you remember in the transition from the CoCo 2 to the CoCo 3, Tandy had 16K color computer 2s and had 64K color computer 2s, and they were
Yes.
in different catalog numbers. And then the CoCo 3 came out. Then all of a sudden, the 16K CoCo 2s went away, and 64K CoCo 2s were the only thing available after the CoCo 3 came out. I have a theory about that, because when my first CoCo 2 was a 26-3136B. It was a 16K extended color basic CoCo 2. I got it in the summer of 1985 from my local Radio Shack. I cannot find that model number online on eBay anymore. And what I think has happened, what happened was when the CoCo 3 came out, I think in the warehouse, I think they upgraded all the 16K CoCo 2s to 64K CoCo 2s. And the reason I think that is on the side of the box where they would have the catalog number for the CoCo 2, side of the CoCo 2 box, I have seen evidence of 16K where it would say 16K with a sticker on top that says 64K and a sticker on top the model number that says 26-3127B. I think that those CoCo 2s that were 16K were upgraded to 64K because Tandy wanted to consolidate the CoCo 2 model to one model number when the CoCo 3 came out. Does that make sense?
Well, it makes sense, and certainly reworking things and upgrading things after they were received here, and having a line dedicated to do whatever had to happen to make that happen was not an unusual thing, not at all. The reasons why, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it was because, again, if the CoCo 3 had come out, the CoCo 3 was out, there was no point in selling a 16K CoCo 2 and a 64K CoCo 2 and a 16K extended, 16K standard. My thought was, hey, let's consolidate the line, get all these CoCo 2s sold as 64K CoCo 2s, drop the price, and then we're done.
I think you hit on it right there. I'm sure it was a pricing decision.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Kathy, it was a pleasure. I appreciate your time. Thank you for the insight. I think the keyboard discussion was particularly great because a lot of people in the color computer community today probably had questions about that. Who were the manufacturers? And to know that there were 3 different manufacturers for the 3 different types of keyboards is especially interesting. And anyway, I want to thank you for your time.
Well, it was a good time. It was a good time, some good memories. So thank you. I'm surprised that anyone is really still interested this day and time, but it's good to know they are.
CoCo Conversations is copyright 2023 by Boisy Pitre. Exclusive licensing